My name is Evelyn, and I used to think betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. Because betrayal is just the beginning. The real pain comes when they think they've won, when they show up at your door, smirking, victorious, ready to take everything. But what they don't know, I've been planning for this moment. So when the knock came that morning, sharp, insistent, demanding, I didn't flinch. And when I opened the door to see Lisa, my husband's new girlfriend, grinning like she owned my life, I just smiled. Because she had no idea what was coming. The knock came again, sharper this time, impatient. Whoever was on the other side wasn't going away. I took my time walking to the door, my fingers tightening around the silk belt of my robe. A part of me already knew who it was. Some instincts don't need confirmation. When I pulled the door open, there she stood, Lisa. She looked exactly as I remembered from the few stolen glimpses, the woman my husband had left me for. Long blonde hair, perfectly curled, a dress that clung just enough to flaunt her victory. And that smirk, the one that said she had already won. She didn't waste time. You need to start packing, Evelyn. We're moving in. My stomach should have dropped. My hands should have trembled. But they didn't. Instead, I tilted my head, my lips curling slightly. Because I wasn't alone. Just beyond the doorway, just out of Lisa's line of sight, stood my lawyer. And in that moment, I knew something she didn't. She thought this was the end for me. She had no idea it was just the beginning. Before we continue this story, I want to connect with you, my incredible viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop the flag of your country in the comments below. And hey, if you're watching this alone, I want you to remember something. No matter where you are, you're not alone. Because right now, at this very moment, I'm here, sharing this story with you. Now, back to Lisa. Lisa's smirk widened, her perfectly lined lips curving with the kind of triumph that made my stomach churn, not from fear, but from something else, anticipation. This house is Mark's now, she continued, stepping inside like she already belonged here, like she had won. I didn't stop her. I didn't react at all. Instead, I let my fingers trail along the edge of the doorframe, watching her with an expression just neutral enough to keep her confident, because the more confident she was, the harder she was going to fall. You might want to start boxing up your things, Lisa added, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floors I had chosen, paid for, and protected. She turned in a slow circle, surveying the living room like it was some grand prize she was now entitled to. Mark and I have big plans for this place, she mused. I was thinking of repainting, maybe knocking down a few walls. Lisa. I said her name calmly, smoothly, too smoothly. Her gaze snapped back to mine, eyes narrowing slightly. She wasn't expecting that. She was expecting rage, screaming, maybe even tears. But I just stood there, my expression unreadable. She shifted slightly, trying to regain her footing. I get that this is hard for you, she continued, adopting a mock sympathetic tone. Losing everything at once, it's gotta hurt. But honestly, Evelyn, it's for the best. Mark and I are in love. It's time for you to move on. There it was, the audacity. The absolute staggering arrogance of a woman who had no idea what she had walked into. I inhaled slowly, taking a deliberate step back. There's something you should know, I said lightly, gesturing toward the hallway. She frowned, but curiosity flickered in her eyes. She had already won, right? What harm could there be in humoring me? And that's when she saw him. My lawyer. Tall, silent, composed. He had been standing just out of her line of sight, his leather folder neatly tucked under his arm, his expression unreadable. Lisa's smirk twitched, just slightly. Her fingers tightened around the papers in her hands like she could physically hold on to the control she thought she had. What? What is this? She asked, her voice not quite as steady as before. My lawyer took a step forward, flipping open his folder with a measured, deliberate precision. Miss Lisa, correct? His voice was polite, detached, almost bored. He didn't even wait for her to confirm. Lisa bristled. Excuse me? He adjusted his glasses, skimming over the documents in his hands before glancing up at her. Let's talk about these so-called ownership papers you're holding. Because I have a feeling you've been misinformed. Lisa's face froze. Her grip on the papers tightened, knuckles whitening. That's not possible, she snapped. Mark said, Mark lied, I cut in smoothly. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I let the moment linger, let her confusion settle, let the doubt creep in. You really think Mark just magically gained ownership of this house? I continued, tilting my head slightly. Did you even check the deed, or did you just take his word for it? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Of course she hadn't checked. Of course she had just believed him. just like I had. Once. I turned to my lawyer, nodding slightly. Go ahead, I said. I think she should hear it from a professional. Lisa's breathing had grown uneven. Her confidence was slipping, fast. My lawyer cleared his throat. Miss Lisa, he began, his voice polite, detached, devastatingly efficient. This house? He gestured slightly to the walls around us, the very foundation Lisa thought she had won. It was never Mark's to give away. Lisa blinked. What? He continued flipping through his papers. In fact, not only was Mark never the sole owner of this property, but legally, he has no claim to it at all. Not before, not now, and certainly not after the divorce proceedings. Lisa's smirk vanished. But Mark told me, he told you what you wanted to hear, I said. Because that's what Mark does. He lies, he manipulates. And he bets on people being too blind, too trusting, too desperate to question him. Her mouth opened, then shut. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to force her to listen. You think you're special, Lisa? I asked, my tone almost gentle. You think you're different? That he wouldn't do to you what he did to me? Her breath hitched. You believed everything he said, didn't you? I continued. Just like I did. You trusted him. You let him convince you that you'd won, that you had everything, that he had everything. I let the silence settle before delivering the final blow. But the truth is, you have nothing. Her lips parted, her breathing sharp and uneven. That's not true, she muttered. It can't be true. Mark said. He said he worked it out with the lawyers. He said the house was his. He said, my lawyer sighed, closing his folder. He worked nothing out, he said bluntly. What he did was attempt to file fraudulent paperwork, which I assume is what you're holding right now. Lisa's fingers trembled against the useless stack of papers in her hands. The papers that meant absolutely nothing. Reality crashed into her like a tidal wave. I watched it unfold in real time, the way her smug confidence dissolved into doubt, then confusion, then full-blown panic. She had walked into this house thinking she was stepping into her future. Instead, she had walked straight into her worst nightmare. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, watching as the truth finally settled in. And then, Lisa snapped. Her grip on the papers loosened, her expression twisting into something dangerous. That bastard, she hissed under her breath. I raised an eyebrow. Is something wrong, Lisa? Her eyes burned with fury as she turned back to me, her entire body trembling. He lied to me, she seethed. He told me, he promised me, he said he had this all figured out. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Oh my God, he has nothing, doesn't he? I simply smiled. Lisa inhaled sharply, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. Her nails tapped furiously against the screen as she scrolled through her contacts, her breath coming in short, angry bursts. She was panicking, she was realizing, and I already knew what she was going to do. She was going to call Mark. She was going to demand answers. She was going to realize, far too late, that she had hitched her future to a sinking ship, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Lisa's hands were shaking as she scrolled through her contacts, her manicured nails tapping furiously against the screen. She was unraveling, falling apart in real time. And I was just standing there, watching the inevitable unfold. The phone rang once, twice. Then, hey babe. Mark's voice came through the speaker, casual, cocky, completely unaware of the storm brewing on the other end. Lisa didn't waste a second. You lying piece of garbage, she shrieked, her voice rising with every word. You told me the house was yours, that we were moving in, that you threw Evelyn out. Silence. I could practically hear Mark blinking in confusion on the other end. What? Lisa spun toward me, her eyes blazing. Tell him, she demanded. I smirked, taking a slow sip of my now-forgotten coffee before setting the mug down. Hey, Mark, I said smoothly. Interesting day we're having. There was another pause, longer this time. Then his voice returned, but it wasn't as confident anymore. What's going on? Lisa gritted her teeth. What's going on? She echoed mockingly. I just showed up at Evelyn's house, ready to move in like you told me, and guess what? She turned back to me, her face burning with fury. She still owns it. The line went silent. That's when I knew. That's when Lisa knew. Mark had nothing to say because there was nothing he could say. That's not possible, he stammered. I filed the paperwork, Lisa cut him off. You filed nothing. You lied to me. You said we'd be starting fresh, that you took care of everything. Mark's breathing grew heavier. Lisa, just listen. No, you listen, she snapped. You made me look like a fool. You promised me a life, Mark. You said we'd be set. I crossed my arms, watching the cracks spread deeper. Lisa was finally seeing him for who he really was. And then came the final, brutal realization. Lisa's voice dropped, quieter now, colder. Do you even have anything? She asked. Anything at all? A house? A job? A single dollar to your name? Mark hesitated, too long. Lisa let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Oh my God, you have nothing. Mark's voice turned desperate. Lisa, we can fix this. Fix it, she repeated. You mean like how you fixed this house situation? How you fixed your marriage? How you fixed draining your wife's accounts before she caught you? Mark tried again. Baby, don't baby me. Her voice was venom now. I left everything for you. I trusted you. She let out a ragged breath. You used me. Another pause, a heavy, suffocating pause. Then click. She hung up. Lisa stood frozen for a moment, her hands gripping the phone so tightly I thought she might crack it in half. She looked like a woman whose entire world had just collapsed around her. And honestly, it had. Slowly, she turned to face me. For the first time since she'd walked through my door, she wasn't smirking. She exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over her face. You planned this, she muttered. You wanted me to find out like this. I shrugged. I didn't force you to show up at my house uninvited, Lisa. That was all you. Her lips parted, but she had no comeback for that. She had done this to herself. She had believed the wrong person, hitched her future to a sinking ship, and now she was drowning. Without another word, she turned and stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the floor. A broken woman walking away from the wreckage of her choices. I watched from the doorway as she reached her car, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut. For a moment, she just sat there, gripping the wheel. Then she hit dial. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. She was done with Mark. And Mark was about to realize just how alone he really was. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me, locking out the past for good. I barely had time to take another sip of my coffee before my phone buzzed. I glanced down. Mark. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. A part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him stew in his mess, drowning in the consequences of his own choices. But another part of me, I wanted to hear the desperation. Curiosity won. I picked up, keeping my voice steady. What do you want, Mark? His breathing was uneven, laced with frustration and panic. Evelyn, whatever you told Lisa, you need to fix it. She just called me screaming, saying I ruined her life. You made me look like an idiot. I smirked. Mark, you did that all on your own. Silence. Then his tone shifted, softer now, manipulative. Listen, let's talk, he tried. We don't have to fight like this. We were married for 12 years, Evelyn. You can't just throw me away like I'm nothing. I almost laughed at the pure hypocrisy. Oh, but you could throw me away? I asked, my voice icy. You could drain our accounts, move on with your younger upgrade, and expect me to just accept it? That's different. He snapped. I made mistakes, okay? But I was hurt too. We weren't happy. I let his words settle in the air for a moment. Then I asked, Are you happy now, Mark? More silence. I already knew the answer. As much as I'd love to stay and chat, I said lightly, I have a business to run. Oh, by the way. I paused, savoring the moment. I got a call from my lawyer this morning. I heard him swallow. And? Your petition to revisit the divorce settlement? I let the words hang. The judge denied it. Again. His frustration turned to outright rage. This isn't fair, Evelyn. You set me up. You planned this whole thing behind my back. I couldn't help but smile. No, Mark, I said, my voice smooth and final. I just paid attention. And with that, I hung up. I expected that to be the last time I ever heard from him. I was wrong. I thought that was the end of it. That after Lisa left and Mark's pathetic attempt to win me back failed, I'd finally be free of him. That I could close this chapter of my life and never look back. But 2 days later, Lisa was back at my doorstep. Only this time, there was no smug grin, no condescending tone. She looked defeated. Her makeup, once flawless, was smudged. Her perfectly styled hair was a mess, like she hadn't even bothered to brush it. She looked like a woman who had been blindsided. I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Lisa. She hesitated, shifting her weight. Evelyn, she murmured. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then she exhaled sharply and said the last thing I ever expected to hear. I'm sorry. I didn't respond, just watched her, waiting. I was stupid, she continued, her voice cracking. I believed him. He told me you were cold, controlling, that you never supported him. She let out a humorless laugh. I thought I was different, that he wouldn't do to me what he did to you. I stayed quiet. But you were right, she whispered. Everything you said. He used me. He drained my savings, maxed out my credit cards, and when I asked him to help with rent, she shook her head, her voice trembling. He told me I was too much to handle, that I was holding him back. I inhaled slowly. So, Mark had officially run out of people to use. I studied Lisa carefully. I wasn't sure if I forgave her, but I understood her, because once upon a time, I had been exactly where she was standing now. So what now? I asked. Are you running back to him? She let out a bitter laugh. No, I'm done. She hesitated, then glanced down at her hands. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I nodded slowly, stepping back. Good luck, Lisa. She gave me a small, sad smile. Then she turned and walked away. That night, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine, reflecting on everything that had happened. I had thought revenge would feel different. That when Mark finally hit rock bottom, I'd feel a rush of victory. But the truth? I didn't feel anything for him anymore. And that's when I knew. I had already won. Because winning wasn't about taking everything from him. It was about rebuilding myself. Mark? He was still stuck, still trying to scam and manipulate his way through life, still refusing to take responsibility for his choices. That wasn't my problem anymore. My lawyer sent me one final update. Mark had applied for a new credit card. Denied. He had tried to get a loan. Denied. He was drowning. And for once, I wasn't going to save him. I lifted my glass in a silent toast to moving on. And just like that, I closed the chapter on him forever. 1 year later, the morning air was crisp as I stepped into my boutique, the little shop Mark had once mocked. The bell above the door chimed softly, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. No more legal battles. No more desperate phone calls. No more shadows of the past looming over me. I had won. Not in the way Mark had feared. Not through revenge or screaming or destruction. I had won by simply living well. I kept a framed quote above my desk, a small reminder of everything I had survived. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's moving on. And that's exactly what I did. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about strength and self-respect. Evelyn didn't destroy Mark. He did that to himself. She simply chose to move forward, and that's the real victory. What do you think? Drop a 2 if you liked the story, or a 7 if it wasn't for you. If this story made you think, smile, or feel empowered, hit that like button. And if you love twists, drama, and powerful lessons, subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on. See you in the next story.